Judge's verdict shocks the courtroom. What unfolds next will change a family's fate and ignite a community revolution. Dive into the full story of lost twins, a mysterious father, and the power of redemption. In a rundown section of Cedarwood, a city where the forgotten corners echoed with the stories of those left behind, twin brothers Omari and Isaiah Hawkins learned early that life rarely offered second chances. Born into a world marred by loss and abandonment, the twins spent their formative years shuffled between underfunded foster homes and temporary shelters, each place as cold and indifferent as the last. Their mother had passed away when they were very young, and their father, whose name was spoken only in hushed, uncertain tones, had been absent from their lives as if he were nothing more than a myth. Every morning, the twins awoke to the sound of distant sirens and the creak of weathered apartment doors. In the dim light of early dawn, they would sit together on a rickety bench outside a crumbling building, sharing a small bag of stale bread and the silent promise that one day, they would discover the truth about the man who should have been their protector. Omari, the elder by 2 years, had taken on a paternal role for Isaiah, his gentle yet determined manner belying the heavy burden he carried. Even as a child, Omari was forced to grow up too soon, his eyes reflecting the sorrow of a past he barely remembered but felt every day. At school, where Cedarwood High loomed like a relic of forgotten dreams, the twins were unavoidably singled out, not just for their quiet demeanor, but also for the subtle differences in the way they carried themselves. Their clothes were worn and mismatched, and their skin, rich and deep, made them stand out in an environment where conformity was the rule. The hallways were filled with judgmental glances and cruel whispers, and many of their classmates assumed the worst based solely on appearances. Teachers, too, sometimes treated them as if they were nothing more than a burden, a stark reminder of a society that had long failed to protect its most vulnerable. In these moments of isolation, the twins clung to each other and to the fragments of hope that came in unexpected forms. A kind word from a sympathetic teacher or a rare smile from a fellow student could briefly lift the weight of their world, even if only for a fleeting second. They often retreated into the quiet corners of the library or huddled together on the steps outside the school, where the soft glow of a street lamp provided a small, comforting refuge from the relentless cold of rejection. But beneath the surface of their daily struggle lay an even deeper mystery, a question that haunted every silent night: who was their father? The mere possibility that he might still be out there, somewhere beyond the reach of the system that had so cruelly abandoned them, became a secret prayer whispered between the two. They collected scraps of overheard conversation, old newspaper clippings, and faded photographs that hinted at a man once known as Ambrose Laramie, a name that, in the half-remembered stories of their youth, was associated with hope, strength, and dignity. Though the details were few and far between, the name resonated in their hearts like a promise of a better future. In the midst of this painful uncertainty, their lives took an even harsher turn when they were summoned to a custody hearing at Cedarwood Family Court, a place where cold bureaucracy and unfeeling judgments often reeked of indifference. The twins, trembling and unsure, were forced to stand before a judge whose reputation for harshness was well known. Unbeknownst to everyone present, this day would mark the beginning of a journey that would eventually shatter assumptions and ignite a quiet revolution of hope. As Omari and Isaiah Hawkins were led into the sterile courtroom, every detail, the cold marble floors, the oppressive silence of the jury, the judge's unyielding gaze, seemed designed to strip away what little dignity they had left. In that moment, the pain of their past and the mystery of their absent father converged, setting the stage for events that would not only transform their lives but also challenge the very system that had once reduced them to nothing more than broken fragments of a lost family. And so, with hearts heavy yet resolute, the twins took their place in a room that would soon echo with both humiliation and the faint stirrings of redemption, a prelude to a story of pain, perseverance, and the unbreakable promise that even the darkest beginnings can someday give way to a future filled with light. The following morning, a heavy gray sky hung over Cedarwood as Omari and Isaiah Hawkins were led into the cold, imposing halls of Cedarwood Family Court. The courthouse itself was a relic of a bygone era, its high ceilings and stone walls imbued with an air of stern authority. Every step along the polished marble corridor echoed with the weight of decades of judgment, and for the twins, so young and already burdened with sorrow, each echo felt like a reminder of the neglect they had endured. Clutching each other's hands, they were escorted into a spacious courtroom that seemed to swallow their quiet voices whole. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive. The room was dimly lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast long, unforgiving shadows across rows of wooden benches. At the front, behind an imposing, dark wood bench, sat Judge Winifred Devereux, a woman whose reputation for ruthlessness was known throughout the community. Her icy gaze swept over the assembled parties with little hint of warmth. As Omari and Isaiah were seated at a long table in front of her, the twins could feel every skeptical glance, every whispered judgment, as if the very walls of the courtroom were conspiring to expose the secrets of their troubled past. The proceedings began with a formality that belied the undercurrents of cruelty. The judge's voice, crisp and unyielding, recited the case details with mechanical precision. "We are here today to review the custodial arrangements for the Hawkins twins," she intoned. Her words carried a weight of finality that made the twins shrink further into their seats. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if each word pronounced was another nail in the coffin of their already fragile sense of self-worth. In that moment, the twins' shared silence spoke volumes, a silence laden with grief, frustration, and the desperate hope that somehow, a miracle might emerge from the darkness. As the hearing progressed, the legal representatives presented their evidence, which was a mix of routine foster care records and hastily compiled documents that barely skimmed the surface of the twins' complex history. The judge's tone grew increasingly dismissive as she flipped through the papers, and when the twins were asked to speak, their voices trembled with barely suppressed emotion. Omari, the older and more protective of the two, tried to answer questions about their living conditions and family background, but his words were met with curt interjections that left him reeling. Isaiah's small, quivering voice barely managed to murmur answers that only deepened the judge's scorn. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom seemed to pulsate with the weight of assumptions that defined the twins as nothing more than products of a broken system. Judge Devereux's piercing questions and biting remarks cut into them like shards of glass. "How do you expect to build a future when you come from nothing but sorrow?" she demanded, her tone laden with condescension. The words echoed in the quiet corners of their hearts, each syllable reinforcing a painful narrative that had been forced upon them for so long. Yet, amid the clinical rigor of the courtroom, an undercurrent of quiet resilience stirred within the twins. Even as tears threatened to spill from their eyes, Omari's determined gaze met Isaiah's, conveying an unspoken promise that they would not let the cruelty of that moment define their future. Their minds raced with memories of whispered dreams and secret hopes nurtured during lonely nights. They recalled fragments of conversations about a mysterious father, Ambrose Laramie, a name that surfaced like a fragile beacon in the depths of their recollections, hinting at a lost love and a possibility of redemption. In a surprising twist that sent ripples through the tense proceedings, a social worker named Marybelle Underwood was called to the stand to present additional evidence regarding the twins' family background. With a gentle yet firm tone, she explained that recent investigations had uncovered preliminary records linking Ambrose Laramie to the twins as their biological father. As she laid out the documents, photographs, old correspondence, and fragments of legal filings, the courtroom's atmosphere shifted palpably. The judge's steely facade wavered for a brief moment, and murmurs of disbelief swept through the room. For the first time, the narrative that had been so cruelly imposed upon the twins was being challenged by the possibility of a hidden truth, a truth that could redefine not only their identity but also the very basis of the system that had long failed them. Though the evidence was still preliminary, its implications were immense. The courtroom, once a sterile space of judgment, became a battleground for justice, a place where every preconceived notion was forced to confront the reality of the twins' past. In that charged moment, as Judge Devereux glanced at the documents with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant curiosity, Omari and Isaiah exchanged a look of tentative hope. Their eyes, though still red from unshed tears, now sparkled with the possibility of a future where their true story might finally be acknowledged, a future where the name Ambrose Laramie was no longer a phantom but a key to unlocking the mystery of their identity. As the hearing drew to a close for the day, the twins were led out of the courtroom in a heavy silence. The cool, crisp air outside did little to ease the storm raging within them. Each step away from the building felt like a step into an uncertain future, a future that now held both the sting of past humiliation and the fragile promise of redemption. In the distance, the courthouse loomed like a fortress of hard truths, its cold walls a reminder of the battle that lay ahead. Yet, for Omari and Isaiah, that day marked the beginning of a journey toward reclaiming not just their identity, but also their dignity, as they dared to hope that the painful wounds of their past could one day give way to healing and the possibility of a reunited family. After that emotionally charged day in the courtroom, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins returned to the small, cramped foster apartment that had become their reluctant home. The drive from Cedarwood Family Court had been silent, each twin lost in their own turbulent thoughts as the city lights blurred past the window. Once inside, the cold, familiar walls seemed to close in on them, amplifying the raw mix of humiliation, confusion, and the budding spark of hope that had been ignited by the new evidence presented by Marybelle Underwood. That evening, as rain tapped softly against the window, Omari sat at the rickety dining table while Isaiah curled up on a faded couch in the corner. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken questions. Omari's eyes, usually so steady despite the harshness of their reality, now betrayed a vulnerability that had not been there before. Slowly, he began to speak in a low voice, recounting the judge's harsh words, the sneers that had echoed off the courtroom walls, and the unexpected moment when Marybelle Underwood had revealed documents linking their mysterious father, Ambrose Laramie, to their very existence. "Isaiah," Omari said quietly, do you think there's any truth to her words? That maybe, just maybe, Dad is out there?" Isaiah's eyes widened as he listened, his voice barely a whisper in reply, "I want to believe it. Every night, I've wished for a piece of that story." In that moment, their shared longing for the father they'd never truly known began to bridge the gap between their sorrow and hope. Later that night, the twins received a visit from Marybelle Underwood herself. The social worker's gentle knock at the door startled them, and after a pause filled with trepidation, they opened it to find her standing in the doorway. Her warm eyes shone with empathy, and in her hand she held a thick envelope that carried the promise of answers. "I know this is hard," she said softly, stepping inside and sitting on the worn sofa with them, "but I've been working to verify every detail about Ambrose Laramie. There's more to your story than what you've been told." Over the next hour, in a quiet, dimly lit room, Marybelle carefully explained the contents of the documents, old photographs, excerpts from legal filings, and letters that hinted at a man once admired in the community before he vanished into obscurity. As Marybelle spoke, Omari and Isaiah listened with rapt attention. The story she wove was bittersweet. Ambrose had been a respected community leader who, after a series of personal tragedies and systemic failures, had lost his way. His disappearance had not been a matter of indifference, but of overwhelming personal despair and societal neglect. "I know it might be difficult to understand," Marybelle continued, "but there are indications that Ambrose Laramie has been trying, in his own way, to come back to you." Her words, though measured and careful, filled the room with a palpable tension, a mixture of hope and the fear of further disappointment. After she left, the twins sat in silence for a long time, letting her words settle in. Outside, the relentless patter of rain seemed to echo the soft beat of their hearts as they contemplated the possibility that the man they had long imagined might someday rescue them from the void of abandonment could actually be real. For the first time in years, they dared to dream, not of a fantasy, but of a future where their family might be whole. Omari's protective nature mingled with Isaiah's tender, childlike hope, and together, they made a silent pact to search for the truth, to explore every lead that might finally reveal their father's identity. That night, in the solitude of their shared room, the twins began to map out a plan. They gathered old letters and scraps of newspaper clippings they had managed to keep over the years, a mosaic of hints that pointed to a man named Ambrose Laramie. They examined each piece of evidence with cautious excitement, comparing the faded photographs and dates with what Marybelle had described. In the quiet dim light, with a battered journal and a pencil between them, they scribbled down questions and possible avenues to explore, forging a small but determined roadmap toward the elusive truth. As midnight approached, the room filled with the soft glow of a single lamp, and the twins finally allowed themselves to feel a glimmer of hope. Their plan was fragile, built on whispers and half-remembered names, yet it was real, a first step toward reclaiming an identity that had been lost in the shadows of neglect. In that moment, despite the lingering pain of the day's humiliation, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins dared to imagine a future where the mystery of their father would be solved, where the legacy of their past would not define them, but would propel them toward a brighter tomorrow. Thus, in the quiet aftermath of a harsh day in court, amid the steady, hopeful murmur of the rain and the determined scribbles on a worn journal, the twins embarked on a journey that promised not only to reveal the truth about Ambrose Laramie but also to transform their lives from one of endless sorrow into a saga of hope, courage, and the unyielding power of family. Later that week, with Marybelle Underwood's revelations echoing in their minds, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins decided that they could no longer wait passively for answers. In the dim light of their cramped foster apartment, the twins gathered every scrap of evidence they had managed to keep, a few yellowed newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and hastily scribbled notes from whispered conversations. Together, they pored over these clues, their heads bent close as they tried to piece together the elusive puzzle of their father, Ambrose Laramie. Determined to break free from the cycle of uncertainty, Omari, the more pragmatic of the two, proposed that they visit the local Cedarwood Library, a venerable institution known for its extensive archives of old community records. "Maybe there's something in the old city directories or newspaper archives that can tell us more about Ambrose," he whispered to Isaiah as they huddled together in the low light of their shared room. Isaiah's eyes, wide with hope and trepidation, nodded slowly, and they made a silent pact: they would search for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The following Saturday, under an overcast sky that promised rain, the twins slipped out early. At the library, amid the musty scent of aging paper and the quiet rustle of turning pages, they found a treasure trove of forgotten records. Hours melted away as they combed through microfiche reels and brittle newspapers, uncovering snippets of local history that hinted at a man once held in high regard. One article, tucked away in a 1980s community newsletter, mentioned Ambrose Laramie as a dedicated community activist, a man who had organized local youth programs and fought tirelessly for social justice, before a series of personal tragedies and bureaucratic mishaps had forced him into obscurity. Emboldened by these findings, the twins sought further clues by interviewing a retired librarian named Clara Pembroke, known throughout Cedarwood for her encyclopedic knowledge of local lore. In her sunlit, book-lined study, Clara carefully examined the faded documents the boys had collected. Ambrose Laramie was a remarkable man, she recalled, her voice soft yet resonant. "I remember him organizing fundraisers and even speaking at town meetings. But something happened, his name began to vanish from the records, as if someone didn't want the truth to be known." Clara's cryptic words sent a shiver down their spines, hinting at secrets buried beneath layers of red tape and neglect. Armed with Clara's recollections and a handful of new leads, Omari and Isaiah ventured into the heart of Cedarwood's historic district. There, hidden among dilapidated storefronts and faded murals, they encountered an elderly gentleman named Rufus Calloway, a former community organizer who had once worked closely with Ambrose. Rufus, his eyes clouded with age yet still sparkling with a fierce intelligence, listened intently as the twins recounted their journey. "Ambrose was like a beacon to us," Rufus said slowly, "but he vanished after a scandal that was more than it seemed. I always suspected there was more to his story, a cover-up, perhaps." Rufus offered to show them a series of old photographs and letters he had stored away in his attic, documents that painted Ambrose not as a criminal or a coward, but as a man overwhelmed by circumstance and forced into silence by a system that had failed him. That day marked a turning point in their quest. In the fading light of an autumn afternoon, the twins left Rufus's modest home with a renewed sense of purpose. Each piece of evidence they gathered, the newspaper clippings, Clara's whispered secrets, Rufus's archival treasures, formed a mosaic of truth. They began to understand that Ambrose Laramie had not simply abandoned them, he had been ensnared by forces beyond his control, his own dreams of community and justice crushed by personal tragedy and institutional indifference. On their walk back through the winding streets of Cedarwood, Omari and Isaiah talked in hushed tones about the possibility of confronting this hidden past. They imagined a future where they could not only uncover the full story of their father but also find a way to forgive the pain that had defined their early lives. The journey was fraught with uncertainties, and each step into the dusty archives of the past was tinged with both hope and fear. Yet the deeper they delved, the more they began to see that their struggle was part of something larger, a quiet revolution against the neglect and misunderstanding that had so long defined their world. As dusk fell, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, the twins returned home with a newfound determination. The library's doors closed behind them, but the light of knowledge and the warmth of shared discovery glowed within their hearts. In that moment, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins vowed that they would not let their story end in despair. With every fragment of evidence they had uncovered, they were piecing together not only the truth about Ambrose Laramie, but also the promise of a future where their identity, and their pain, would be acknowledged, healed, and ultimately transformed into a legacy of hope. Later that week, armed with the clues gleaned from the library archives and the heartfelt testimony of Rufus Calloway, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins resolved to take a daring step forward in their quest for the truth about their long-lost father. Under the muted glow of a fading autumn afternoon, the twins slipped away from the modest Foster apartment, their minds heavy with a mix of trepidation and quiet determination. They planned to visit a little-known community center on the outskirts of Cedarwood, a place Rufus had mentioned as once being a hub for local activists and, notably, for Ambrose Laramie's early work. The community center, tucked between a row of abandoned storefronts and overgrown sidewalks, exuded an air of faded vibrancy. Its weathered brick facade and peeling paint told a story of better days, when neighbors gathered to discuss hopes and challenges over shared meals and spirited debates. As Omari and Isaiah approached the building, their steps faltered for a moment in awe of the history hidden within its walls, a history that might just include the father they so desperately sought. Inside, the air was thick with memories. Old photographs lined the walls, capturing moments of community pride and the smiling faces of once hopeful activists. At the far end of the main hall, a faded mural depicted a man with kind eyes and a determined stance, a man who the twins' names had whispered to them in bedtime stories and secret dreams, Ambrose Laramie. Their hearts pounded as they recognized the silhouette, the brushstrokes of a long-forgotten era that might hold the key to their past. They wandered slowly through the center, examining plaques, faded letters pinned to bulletin boards, and remnants of newspaper clippings that chronicled local events. Every scrap of paper seemed to echo with Ambrose's voice, telling of his days organizing neighborhood events and speaking passionately at town meetings. Omari, the more pragmatic of the two, carefully documented each detail in a small, battered notebook, while Isaiah traced his fingers over the images, as if trying to absorb the man's warmth through the cool surface of the photographs. In a quiet back room of the center, they discovered a trove of archives, a dusty collection of community newsletters, event flyers, and handwritten notes that spoke of Ambrose's transformative influence on local youth. There, amid the musty smell of old paper and faded ink, the twins found a letter addressed to the center from Ambrose himself. The letter was a poignant mixture of hope and regret, describing his passion for community work and hinting at a personal struggle that forced him to retreat from public life. The letter ended with a promise that if fate ever allowed, he would return to reclaim what he had once built. Omari's eyes filled with tears as he read aloud the final lines, and Isaiah clutched his brother's hand tightly, both of them overcome by the bittersweet blend of pain and possibility. That evening, with the letter tucked safely inside their notebook, the twins returned to their foster home feeling both exhausted and strangely uplifted. The evidence they had found was a tangible piece of their past, a promise of a father who, though lost to time and hardship, still lived in the collective memory of a community that had once revered him. They spent hours discussing their next steps in hushed whispers, imagining what it might be like to finally meet the man whose absence had defined so much of their early lives. Their conversation was filled with uncertainty and hope, a delicate balancing act between the fear of further disappointment and the desperate desire for familial connection. Before drifting off to a restless sleep, Omari scribbled in his journal, "Today we found a piece of him. It's like a long-forgotten song suddenly remembered. Tomorrow, we'll keep searching for answers." Isaiah, lying awake in the adjoining room, listened to his brother's soft words and allowed himself to dream, even if just for a moment, of a future where their family might finally be whole. In the days that followed, the twins began to plan a careful inquiry into Ambrose Laramie's current whereabouts. They knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the tangible evidence they uncovered had ignited a determination that could not be quelled. Their journey had taken on a new, almost sacred dimension, one that promised not only to reveal the secrets of a forgotten father but also to mend the fractures in their own hearts. Each step they took was a testament to the resilience born of sorrow and the hope that, even in the darkest corners of their past, a light of redemption could still be found. After returning from the community center with the letter and a trove of old records tucked safely in their notebook, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins realized that their journey had only just begun. That evening, in the small kitchen of their foster apartment, the twins huddled around a flickering lamp as they spread out every scrap of evidence they had gathered. The yellowed pages, faded photographs, and the heartfelt letter from Ambrose Laramie formed a delicate mosaic of a past they had scarcely known but desperately longed to reclaim. Omari traced his finger over a particular passage in the letter, a promise that if fate allowed, Ambrose would return to rebuild the community he once cherished. Isaiah, his eyes wide and hopeful, whispered, "Do you think he's still out there?" Their voices, soft but determined, mingled with the low hum of the apartment's aging heater. In that moment, the oppressive weight of their history began to lift, replaced by a fragile spark of possibility that urged them to search further for the truth. The next morning, under a sky streaked with the pale light of early spring, the twins set out on a careful expedition into Cedarwood's past. They planned their route meticulously, starting with the town's old archive room at the Cedarwood Historical Society, a dusty building nestled between modern storefronts, its walls lined with records of community events and local legends. With a mixture of trepidation and excitement, they entered the building, the scent of old paper and wood polish evoking memories of forgotten times. For hours, Omari and Isaiah sifted through stacks of microfiche and brittle newspaper clippings. Their eyes were drawn to an article from the late 1980s that described Ambrose Laramie as a visionary leader who had organized neighborhood festivals and lobbied for better housing conditions. The article mentioned a community center he had once helped establish, and even a photo captured him smiling amidst a group of enthusiastic volunteers. Each piece of information was a piece of the puzzle, slowly revealing a picture of a man who had once been a beacon of hope in Cedarwood, a man whose downfall had been as mysterious as it was tragic. Encouraged by this new discovery, the twins decided to seek out someone who had known Ambrose personally. Their search led them to a retired teacher, Ms. Bernadette "Bernie" Carruthers, who had taught at Cedarwood High for over 3 decades. In her modest, book-lined living room filled with mementos of a bygone era, Ms. Carruthers welcomed the twins with gentle kindness. Over a cup of lukewarm tea, she recounted stories of Ambrose's tireless work and the heartbreak that followed when political scandals and personal tragedies forced him into seclusion. Ambrose was a man of immense passion, she explained, her eyes misting over as she remembered, but the system he fought against was too powerful. "I always believed he was forced to disappear rather than simply abandon his family." Her words, laden with empathy and sorrow, resonated deeply with Omari and Isaiah, fortifying their resolve to find him. As the afternoon waned, the twins left Ms. Carruthers's home with a renewed sense of purpose. They gathered every new lead, a phone number scribbled on the back of an old community flyer, a mention of a public forum once attended by Ambrose, even the address of a dilapidated building that had been a meeting spot for local activists in the past. Their plan was both daring and fraught with uncertainty. They would follow these breadcrumbs one by one, determined to piece together the full story of Ambrose Laramie and, ultimately, to locate him. That evening, under the dim glow of a street lamp and with their notebook clutched tightly in hand, Omari and Isaiah made a solemn pact. They would not let the ghosts of their past continue to dictate their future. With voices barely above a whisper, they promised each other that no matter how painful the truth might be, they would face it together. The letter's promise, the notion that their father would one day return, was now a tangible goal, a lighthouse guiding them through the murky waters of uncertainty. In the following days, the twins embarked on their investigation with cautious determination. They visited a local barbershop rumored to have once been a frequent meeting place for community activists, and they spoke with the elderly barber who, with a knowing smile and a hint of sadness, recalled a charismatic man who had once inspired the neighborhood. Every conversation, every dusty file they uncovered, built upon the fragile hope that had begun to blossom in their hearts. Though the road was long and filled with obstacles, closed doors, cryptic recollections, and the ever-present fear of disappointment, the twins pressed on. Each clue they uncovered not only brought them closer to understanding their father's tragic disappearance but also empowered them to reclaim their own identities, long suppressed by neglect and misunderstanding. In that painstaking quest, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins discovered that the truth was a multifaceted gem, its many faces reflecting both the darkness of their past and the possibility of a future bathed in the light of redemption. And so, as dusk turned to night on another day of determined searching, the twins returned to their foster home with minds swirling with new questions and hearts filled with a stubborn, unyielding hope. Every new lead was a promise that even the deepest wounds could be healed by the relentless pursuit of truth, that the fractured pieces of their identity could be mended by the sheer force of their will. In that quiet, relentless pursuit, Omari and Isaiah had begun to forge a path that would ultimately lead them not only to their father but also to a future where the scars of the past would serve as the foundation for a legacy of strength, resilience, and boundless hope. That evening, after another long day of following up on every scrap of evidence, Omari and Isaiah found themselves huddled together in the narrow living room of their foster home. The persistent tapping of rain against the windowpane provided a somber soundtrack to their restless thoughts. Over the past few weeks, their investigation into their long-missing father, Ambrose Laramie, had slowly taken shape, from the forgotten records at the library and hushed stories from old community members to the cryptic clues gathered from local businesses. Yet, despite all their efforts, a crucial piece of the puzzle still eluded them. As dusk settled over Cedarwood, the twins sat at their rickety kitchen table, poring over a tattered notebook filled with scribbled leads and rough timelines. Omari's eyes, steady yet burdened by the weight of responsibility, scanned the latest set of notes when Isaiah's voice broke the silence. "There's a name here I haven't seen before," he whispered, pointing to a faded number on a scrap of paper. It was accompanied by the cryptic phrase, "Ambrose's last known address." Their hearts pounded as they exchanged a glance, a mix of cautious hope and apprehension. This could be the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Deciding that they could no longer postpone action, the twins resolved to visit the address the very next morning. With their few belongings packed into a worn backpack, they set out as the first light of dawn touched the city. The address led them to a narrow, winding street in an older part of Cedarwood, where buildings leaned together as if sharing whispered secrets of years gone by. The building in question was a modest brick structure, its facade weathered and marked by time. Omari and Isaiah hesitated at the heavy wooden door, their hearts racing with the possibility that they might finally come face to face with the man whose absence had haunted them. Inside, the building was quiet and shadowed, a stark contrast to the bustling streets outside. In the front lobby, a faded bulletin board displayed community notices and vintage photographs of local events. The twins' eyes were immediately drawn to one particularly old, sepia-toned picture of a man with kind eyes and an earnest smile. The name beneath the photo read, Ambrose Laramie, Community Advocate, 1985. Their pulse quickened as they realized that the evidence from the library and from Ms. Carruthers had led them here for a reason. Gathering their courage, Omari approached the front desk where an elderly clerk sat behind a counter stacked with old newspapers and handwritten ledgers. With a hesitant, respectful tone, he inquired about Ambrose Laramie. The clerk's eyes, lined with years of quiet labor, softened at the mention of the name. "Ah, Ambrose," he murmured, rummaging through a dusty ledger. "He was one of the best of us, a man of great integrity who fought for the underprivileged. I haven't seen him in years, but I recall he lived in the north wing of this building." He pointed with a shaky hand toward a narrow staircase at the back of the lobby. "That way," he added softly, "if you're looking for him." With hearts pounding in unison, the twins ascended the creaking stairs. The corridor at the top was dimly lit by a single, flickering light. Doors lined the hall, their numbers worn and barely visible. At last, they reached a door marked, "North Wing, Apartment 4B." Omari knocked softly, and after a tense moment of silence, the door slowly creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime in his tired eyes, a man whose gentle expression, though marred by the lines of regret, radiated a quiet strength. His clothes were simple, his hair salt and pepper, and for a moment, time stood still as Omari and Isaiah recognized something in his gaze, a blend of sorrow and longing that mirrored their own. "Who's there?" the man asked in a cautious yet warm tone. With a deep breath, Omari stepped forward. "My name is Omari Hawkins, and this is my brother Isaiah. We've been looking for you, Ambrose Laramie. We believe you are our father." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief and emotion. The man's eyes widened, and he took an unsteady step back, as if the very sound of his name had awakened long-buried memories. My children," he stuttered, voice trembling with shock. For a long, agonizing moment, no words were exchanged, only the heavy beating of hearts and the silent reckoning of a lifetime of missed chances. Tears began to glisten in Isaiah's eyes as Omari's steady gaze remained fixed on the man before him. Slowly, Ambrose's weathered face broke into a pained, hopeful smile. "I have longed for you both every day," he whispered, his voice raw with regret and love. "I thought I had lost you forever." In that instant, the fragile barrier between past and present shattered. The room filled with the bittersweet sound of soft sobs and whispered apologies, a father's lament and a son's long-suppressed longing for belonging. As Ambrose stepped aside to allow the twins into his modest apartment, the air was charged with the promise of healing. The cramped space was filled with relics of a bygone era, old photographs, faded awards for community service, and stacks of letters that spoke of ambitions and regrets. Over cups of weak tea and shared stories, Ambrose recounted his turbulent past, the betrayals that had driven him into seclusion, the personal demons that had forced him to withdraw, and the systemic failures that had pushed him to the edge. He admitted that he had tried to reconnect with them in the past, but fear and shame had kept him away. Now, in this fragile reunion, every misstep and every moment of silence was transformed into a promise of new beginnings. That evening, as dusk gave way to night, the three of them sat together by a small window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Omari and Isaiah, once defined by the pain of abandonment, now felt a tentative warmth, a sense of identity slowly mending through the simple act of being reunited. Ambrose, with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, apologized for the years lost and vowed to rebuild the bonds that had been so painfully severed. The twins, their faces awash with conflicting emotions, silently accepted his words, understanding that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges but that this was the first step toward healing. In that small, dimly lit room, the weight of the past was finally lifted, replaced by a fragile, radiant hope. The discovery of their father was not the end of their struggles, but the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter defined by forgiveness, resilience, and the promise that even the deepest scars can someday fade in the light of understanding. And as the rain outside eased into a gentle drizzle, the three of them sat together, united by a long-sought truth and the unyielding possibility of a future replete with love, redemption, and a family finally whole. As summer advanced, the long-awaited final custody hearing arrived with an air of both nervous anticipation and cautious optimism. The courthouse, once a cold fortress of bureaucracy, now seemed suffused with an almost tangible warmth, a silent promise that years of pain and neglect were finally giving way to healing. In the refurbished courtroom, with polished wood panels and modern lighting, Judge Winifred Devereux presided over the case with a demeanor that had shifted dramatically since those early, callous days. The once harsh lines on her face had softened, her eyes now reflecting the gravity of her new understanding. Before the assembled crowd of community members, social workers, and supportive family advocates, the twins, Omari and Isaiah Hawkins, sat side by side, their expressions a mixture of tentative hope and lingering sorrow. Ambrose Laramie, their father whose reappearance had sparked an unexpected journey of reconciliation, stood before the judge with humility and resolve. His salt and pepper hair, the lines of regret on his face, and his trembling voice spoke of a man who had known loss all too well, yet was determined to make amends for the years that had passed in silence. Judge Devereux reviewed the meticulously compiled evidence, documents, photographs, and heartfelt testimonies from community figures, and then, with measured deliberation, delivered her verdict. After careful consideration, and in light of the new evidence presented, I hereby rule for the reunification of the Hawkins twins with their biological father, Ambrose Laramie, she pronounced. Her voice, once cold and dismissive, now carried a note of compassion and hope that resonated through every corner of the courtroom. A collective murmur of relief and joy rippled through the audience. Omari's eyes welled with tears as Isaiah clutched his hand, both boys overcome with emotion. Ambrose's voice broke as he spoke softly, "I am so sorry for every day I was absent. I promise to be here for you now, to make up for the lost time." His words, filled with genuine remorse and determination, seemed to cast a spell of healing over the room. In that moment, even Judge Devereux allowed herself a small, empathetic nod, acknowledging the transformative power of truth and forgiveness. Outside the courthouse, the news spread quickly throughout Cedarwood. Local media praised the ruling as a landmark decision, one that not only restored a family but also highlighted the need for systemic reform in the treatment of vulnerable children. Community leaders, long troubled by the indifference that had marked the twins' early years, organized town hall meetings and initiated new support programs aimed at nurturing families and preventing future tragedies. The story of Ambrose Laramie's return and the courageous journey of Omari and Isaiah became a rallying cry for change, a symbol of the power of resilience in the face of institutional failure. In the weeks that followed, Ambrose worked tirelessly to rebuild his life and mend the fractured bond with his sons. With the help of dedicated social workers and compassionate mentors like Marybelle Underwood, he enrolled in counseling and parenting classes. The twins, though still haunted by the years of abandonment, began to find solace in the small acts of kindness that punctuated their new life, a home with warm, caring foster parents who welcomed them, a supportive community that embraced their story, and the unwavering determination of a father who was finally ready to atone. On a bright, warm afternoon at the newly renovated community center, a celebration was held in honor of the twins' reunification with Ambrose. The event, attended by teachers, neighbors, and local officials, was a joyful affirmation of the transformation that had swept through Cedarwood. In a heartfelt speech, Ambrose expressed his gratitude for the chance to rebuild his family, promising to never let his past mistakes define their future. The twins, standing proudly by his side, smiled through tears as they listened to words that spoke of redemption, hope, and the unyielding power of love. As the sun set over Cedarwood that day, its golden rays casting long shadows over a community united by compassion and change, the Hawkins family took their first steps into a future filled with promise. The journey ahead was still fraught with challenges, and the scars of the past would take time to heal, but in that radiant moment, every heart in the room knew that the true legacy of their story was not one of endless sorrow, but of renewal and unwavering hope. The decision in that courtroom had not only reunited a broken family, it had ignited a beacon of transformation, reminding everyone that even in the darkest chapters, there is always the potential for a new, brighter beginning. In my view, the ending of this story is a poignant and transformative tribute to the resilience of the human spirit. It's not just a legal victory or a bureaucratic success, it's a heartfelt reunion that mends years of emotional abandonment and sparks a community-wide movement for change. The way the narrative shifts from cold indifference and humiliation to a moment of raw redemption speaks volumes about the power of forgiveness and the potential for systemic reform when empathy leads the way. The reunion of the Hawkins twins with their long-lost father isn't portrayed as a perfect, fairy tale ending, rather, it acknowledges the deep scars left by past neglect while also celebrating the possibility of healing through understanding and support. This conclusion resonates as a call to transform every setback into an opportunity for renewal, reminding us that even in our darkest moments, the light of compassion can ignite a future full of hope and togetherness.